Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas. Today is The Stacks Book Club discussion of the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. We've brought back author, professor, activist, TV host, and owner of Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Books, Marc Lamont Hill. He's going to help us break down this American classic. There are no spoilers on today's episode, so feel free to enjoy this episode even if you haven't read the book just yet. Be sure to listen all the way to the end of today's episode to find out our pick for the November book club. Each week, I like to take a little time to say thank you to the Stacks Pack. Those are the people who contribute a small amount to the Stacks through Patreon to help make this podcast a reality. In exchange for the generosity, they earn perks like our virtual book club and shout-outs on the show. If you want to join the Stacks Pack and help support this podcast, head to patreon.com/thestacks. Today, I'd like to say an extra special thank you to Moira Folsom, Liz Dustin, Sarah Coquiat, Mackenzie Green, Antonia Adams, Hope Wilkes, Sarah Murphy-Trailer, Elizabeth Fisher, Melissa Jones, and Teresa Mara LaCroix. Thank you all so much. All right, now it's time for the Stacks Book Club conversation on the autobiography of Malcolm X. All right, everybody, I am back again with author, professor, thinker, activist, all around, bookseller, hello, all around wonderful human, Marc Lamont Hill. Marc, welcome back to the Stacks.
Thank you for having me. Yo, I love this place.
I'm so happy. We're going to talk today for the Stacks Book Club about the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. Okay, so we always start here. This is a reread for both you and I, but we always start with this. So what did you think of the book?
I thought that when I first read the autobiography of Malcolm X, I read it and it changed my life. I haven't been the same, honestly, since. And it changed the way I thought. It changed what I believed. It changed my faith. It changed my expectations. Without a drop of hyperbole, the book probably saved my life. But at the very least, it made it a life far more worth living than it ever possibly could have been prior to reading it. And so,
how old were you when you first read it?
That's a good question. I was a teenager or preteen. I was like I was in high school. It was early high school, 9th grade.
Okay.
And I read it. Then I read it again. Then of course I watched the movie like everybody else did, and then I went back and read it again. And every time I returned to the autobiography of Malcolm X, I returned to it differently. But there's still that piece of magic at the core of it that never goes away from me.
Yeah, so the first time I allegedly read it, which I didn't read it, I was assigned to me in my African American history class in high school. And I just wasn't reading books that looked long in high school. Like I just wasn't doing that, just wasn't happening.
So did you not read it at all, or did you just flip through it?
I think I read a few pages, and I've got to be honest, the first time I actually read it and then the first time I fake read it in high school, I thought the beginning was really slow. This time reading it, the beginning did not feel slow to me at all, and I was so confused. Like I thought the beginning was really slow when I was younger. So I read it for real when I was about 22, and I had a similar experience of this whole, it made me feel like this whole shit that I've been taught is just not at all what the shit was. Right. And I mean that about who Malcolm X was, but also what he was talking about and what it meant to be Black. And it was super profound for me in that way that it really shifted my thinking. And something that you and I have in common is that our parents are both kind of a similar generation. My dad, or at least my father, my dad was born in 1935. And so this book, the first time I read it, not so much, but this time it really made me understand my dad in a totally different way. Because my mom is white and my dad is Black. And sometimes my dad would be on some real crazy race shit when I was younger. And I'd be like, there's no racism. This is in the 90s. And it was sort of not appropriate to be young and care about racism, I feel like, at least where I grew up, and at least kind of in the way that race was talked about. And so I remember always thinking my dad was on some like crazy conspiracy type shit, like on little shit too, like not even big things. I can't think of an example, but in rereading this book this time, I was like, this makes so much more sense. Like this, my dad made more sense to me this time. He was in the front of my mind in reading it this time. Whereas the first time I read it, I think I was much more thinking about like, history is a lie and like my teachers are assholes, like it was definitely more of a personal rebellion the first time I read it.
I could see that. For me, the first time was like everything was going off for me. Everything was clicking. It was like, oh wait, this is racist. Oh wait, how did I not see this before? Oh my God, I need to learn more about that. And so for me, it just spun everything around. But again, it wasn't assigned to me. So
right.
I was unlike you who kind of was forced into it, I was allowed to kind of walk into the book when I needed it. My brother, who's 2 years older than me, my next oldest brother was reading all kinds of stuff. And he was a 5%er, so he was, part of, he was reading the black books. He was, doing all kinds of stuff. So I think he told me to read it. And he knew more than I did. So I read it because he told me to read it, But once I read it, it was a wrap for me.
Right. I mean, when I finished it in my 20s, the only thing I could think about was I was such an asshole as a teenager. I can't believe Mr. Green assigned this incredible book, and I was like, it's too long. The print is too small. Because, like, truly, that's what you think of when you're 16 or 17.
Oh, hell yeah. I done turned away a lot of great books like that.
I was like, no, this is going to be a hard no for me. And the African American history class was an elective in high school. So it wasn't like my regular history, and it wasn't my regular English class. And I was like, I'm not reading this. So I think I read some sections and was like, I can pass the test or whatever. I don't even remember there being a test, but I passed the class. So it must have been something.
Right, you're fine.
I feel like it's hard to talk about this book, I think, in a short amount of time because there's so much there. And again, it's a long book. The print is small. It covers a lot of history. It covers a person who had so many changes. I mean, he refers to his life as my whole life is a chronology of changes. And I think, never was that more true about a public figure that I last night when I was preparing for this interview, I was thinking, who else have we seen publicly change their ideology? And I really couldn't think of anybody except for one person. And I don't want to compare these people, but I do think that there's something interesting in I don't know. Before I tell you who I thought of, can you think of anybody who's publicly changed their ideology? Like Malcolm X?
This drastically? I mean, I'm assuming it's someone who went like hard conservative or something. And I'm assuming it's a black person. Who could it be? Who?
Okay. And I'm going to just disclaim the shit out of this. Malcolm X is one of my personal heroes. I think he is a wonderful person. I have only just the best feelings towards him. But the person that came to my mind, and it's a different change of ideology, he changed in a less sincere way, is Donald Trump.
Oh, interesting.
Like what he quote unquote believed in 20, 30 years ago. Sure, he was still a racist, but he had a whole different set of beliefs and public persona and this whole thing. And that was him, and then also Kimberly Guilfoyle, but she's like so minor compared, like it almost felt silly to say that, but right. I don't know. That's like I guess the point is that people don't change publicly like this.
I think that's right. I think Donald Trump, and the other thing is Donald Trump doesn't have a worldview. Right, so Donald Trump sort of says what he says to get what he wants, and if what he wants changes, then he'll say whatever. But what makes that sharply different than Malcolm, to your point,
right, is
that Malcolm was always animated by sincerity, and right. So Malcolm radically changed his worldview in certain ways. I think that gets overstated sometimes. but he radically changed his worldview in public.
Right.
Do you know how hard it is to be that didactic, to be that strident, to be that zealous about A, and then a year later you're like, I was wrong about A, y'all, but I really think B is right now, and I really need y'all to know how important B is. And then, that is a level of humility and sincerity. And Malcolm said that. He said, I'll be driven by my, I want to be remembered for my sincerity, right? That Malcolm understood that. He said, even if I'm wrong, I'm sincere. And I'll keep going. And for me, that's part of what makes Malcolm so admirable to me. So beautiful a spirit and person to me. Not perfect by any stretch, but extraordinary.
Because there's some pureness in that. There's something pure. It's almost like, I don't know, like being naive a little bit, right? That like that sincerity is the thing that matters, like that being wrong or right is secondary to believing fully in what you say, and I think that is an approach, and that's obviously his approach. I don't know. It sort of takes me to the idea of like impact and intent. We talk about that a lot. It's like your intent is less important than your impact. And, Malcolm X sort of was the true believer of my intent is the thing.
Right.
I want to be remembered for my intent. And I think, I guess there's criticism. There could be a lot of, there was a lot of criticism.
Of course. Of course. I mean,
yeah.
I think what makes his book so interesting too is that he's not just changing course in some ways. It's that Malcolm is writing the book with Alex Haley, of course, as he's changing course.
As he's going.
Right. And he didn't go back and change. So the book gets, he meets Haley in 1959. This Playboy interview, and Alex Haley is just taken by Malcolm, who he thinks he's the most interesting story, and I think he is in a lot of ways. I mean, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad creates the nation, or certainly takes leadership of the nation after Master Fard Muhammad leaves in 3.5 years after he arrives in 1930, in July of 1930, and there are few people as extraordinary as Elijah Muhammad in terms of the building of something. Elijah Muhammad built an organization that produces Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan, Muhammad Ali. I mean, like, just the people that it produced alone.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But the story is Malcolm for Alex Haley. And for most Americans, right? I mean, Malcolm, the nation catches its wings in a lot of ways in the national imagination, national black imagination, after Malcolm gets out of prison in 1952 and rises very quickly to the helm as a national spokesperson. Elijah Muhammad is the mind and the spirit, but it's Malcolm who's this thing. And when Alex finally decides to write this book with Malcolm in 1963, Malcolm wants this to be a book with a little bit about him and a whole lot about the nation, right? He wants this to be like St. Augustine, like Confessions, right? He wants this to be like, I'm going to tell this story and you're going to hear how my life got changed. Like a black person in church testifying. I was at the bottom and then I met the Lord and Jesus saved me and then I was converted, right? And now look at me now, right? To testify to the goodness of God. That was kind of the premise, right? Is that Elijah Muhammad's program saved him. But from 1963, when he begins, until February 21st, 1965, when Malcolm is killed, Malcolm has a crisis of conscience, a crisis of faith, better put, right? I mean, he by the end, he's questioning Elijah Muhammad as leader, right? He's gone from the nation. He's at war with the nation. Rhetorically, I'm talking about. At least rhetorically. His belief that Master Fard Muhammad is Allah or God in person is completely shattered. Right? And his belief about the ontological evil of white people. He still thinks white people are the devil.
Right.
But it's not an ontological condition anymore. He doesn't think they're born that way. Now he's talking about white supremacy. Now he's talking about white privilege. Now he's talking about structural racism.
Right.
All this stuff is so can you imagine writing a book? I mean, it's stunning to think about that, right? Like to start a book in 1963 where you believe in this person and this organization and this faith, and then by 65, your faith has shifted. You're still Muslim, but your faith your theology has shifted. Your faith in the leader has shifted. Your goals for people have shifted. Who you want to work with has shifted. You're out of the organization. They're trying to kill you, and the last you believe, right? I don't want to get into the politics of that, but at least you believe that they're after you, as well as the FBI and the CIA and whomever else.
Right,
And now you die before you can finish the book. But even before you died, you didn't go back and change the beginning. So you're still telling the same story. So he's still talking about, and I don't mean to go off on it, but it's just such a fascinating thing to me to think about what it means to tell that story in light of what you know is going to happen. And one of the deals Alex Haley had with Malcolm was that after a chapter was done, that was it. They wouldn't go back and edit it. That once he said it was done, it was done. So, I mean, I'm sure he could have amended that maybe, given the circumstances, but there's still something about not changing it. And Haley's telling Malcolm, no, make it a suspense, make it a thriller, right? Let this unfold in a way where people watch you change in real time. It's like a reality show before the reality show. We're watching Malcolm transform in front of, if that ain't humility, and discipline,
and bravery, because it's not like he's writing this book and changing as a person in, like you said, in private. Like, he's one of the most hated figures in the civil rights movement. Like, he's one of those people that is vilified. Everything he says, everything he does, no matter what he says or does. And so this idea that he is willing to say these things and have a document that is changing is documenting him as he's changing and learning and growing. I mean, that is, if that's not bravery, if that's not, a willingness to just like get canceled, right? Like, to use an anachronistic term, like, he really was just like, fuck it. Like, and that's that sincerity. I really, truly believe this. And if you want to hate me for it, just know that you're really hating who I am, because this is what I really and truly believe. And this is, like, that is, I have episodes of this podcast that 7 people listen to, and I'm like, I want to edit that out. and we're talking about Sula. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's how weak I am as a person, that I'm like listening to it 2 weeks later, editing, being like, I wonder if the show will still make sense if I just cut out this whole 30-minute section because I said something dumb.
I'm the same
way. And like, he's unbelievable.
Yeah.
They're just, I don't even know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah.
No, it's one of the most beautiful things about the book. I mean, Malcolm takes us in a lot of places. I mean, obviously he starts with his childhood, and we're left with these powerful memories of who he is. And I think hearing and witnessing sort of on the page Malcolm's trauma is also one of the most important things that we have to think about, right? Is that Malcolm is traumatized early by the Klan, traumatized early by the death of his father, traumatized by his mother's mental illness. And those pieces of Malcolm give us hints of who he's going to become, or who he could become, right? Because there's a way that him growing up in the Garvey tradition makes sense that he would end up in the Nation of Islam, right?
Right.
But there's also a way that losing your father and your mother being away could make sense that you end up as a street hustler.
Right.
So it's, but there's a way that hearing those early stories gives us a kind of an interesting framework and backdrop to who Malcolm is going to become, or who Malcolm could become. And then as he becomes all of those things, whether it's Detroit Red, whether it's Satan, whether it's, all these things, Malcolm Little, Detroit Red, Satan, Malcolm X, El Hajj Malik Shabazz, all those stages are key. And watching him take us through all of those things, it's powerful to me. I never lose sight of the fact, though, that even as Malcolm is taking us through these stages, it's still Malcolm's version of the world.
Right.
And, later on, Manning Marable, of course, wrote the wonderful biography on Malcolm.
So good. So good.
Malcolm: A Life of Reinvention, and there's a new book coming out on Malcolm that's already longlisted for the.
I know. I haven't read it yet. Have you read it?
No, I haven't gotten a copy. It doesn't come out for another 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my hands on it, but I'm like, it's
Me
longlisted
too.
for the National Book Award. It ain't even out yet. That's a beautiful thing.
It's called The Dead. The Dead Are Arising, and it's
Yeah.
by Les Payne.
And-
Just for those of you who don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, it's a little inside baseball, right? I'm like excited to read it, to know where it goes. But these wonderful biographies, they show us that everything that Malcolm said wasn't true now,
Right.
But again, like whose autobiography is, whose memoir is,
Right.
It's not that Malcolm was telling extravagant lies. It just goes from, maybe you weren't the biggest hustler on the block, maybe you weren't, you know what I mean, maybe you weren't doing big time hustles, maybe you were stealing a little bit out the back of the spot, and et cetera, et cetera. But there are ways that Malcolm tells a story that either part of it is because Malcolm is trying to convince us that the nation's program saved his life. So the more low Malcolm is, then the more extraordinary the conversion narrative becomes. So there's something really powerful and beautiful about that as well. But I'm also struck. I'm struck. Wait, anyway, let me ask you, because I could nerd out about this book by myself all the time.
Okay.
I'm happy to be in conversation. What strikes you about the book? What are some of the things that hit you the most?
So one of the things, when in rereading this, the thing that moved me the most, it actually brought tears to my eyes. I really welled up in a way. And, reading this in 2020 with the coronavirus and this resurgence of Black Lives Matter in a way that had kind of been dormant for the last 3 or 4 years to the larger public, right? One of the things that really struck me was his trip to Mecca. And in my first reading of the book, I'd seen the movie before I ever read the book, so I knew it was going to happen, and I sort of kind of glossed over that. And this time reading it, I was so moved by him experiencing what he felt was a lack of racism and a respect from white people, or people who we would consider white in America, I think is how he kind of phrases it.
Yeah.
And that was so moving to me. Just this feel, and I'm sure you've experienced it in some capacity. I know I have experienced it in some capacity, but when someone speaks to you and they are interested in your thoughts and your opinions outside of race, right? Or when someone is deferential to you because they respect your mind or something you've created, or whatever it is to you in your heart, as a Black American, I've felt glimpses or moments of that. But reading him experiencing that in his own words, that was just it felt really redemptive and kind of healing to me in a way that I don't remember that section at all in my first read. So that's one of the things that was huge. And then the other thing that I was thinking so much about, which is sort of what you're talking about, but a little bit different, is this idea of legacy. And how do we receive him if he had lived? Right? If he had lived, because for example, it's obvious comparison, sort of Louis Farrakhan as someone who, he took over the Nation of Islam, not directly after Elijah Muhammad, but shortly thereafter.
Soon after, yeah.
And he's lived a long life, and he's a super controversial figure. And obviously his politics and his thinking hasn't changed in the same way that we saw that Malcolm X was moving in this other direction. But I just wonder, how is Malcolm X's legacy different if he had been allowed to live, and if he hadn't started on this path of changing? What if he had been assassinated in 1964 before he went to Mecca?
Yeah.
Right? What's that legacy? So I had a lot of what if thinking in this reading.
No, it's a fascinating thought. I'm always skeptical. So a couple of things. One, yeah, I think that the burden of living is its own thing. Martyrdom in many ways can sweep away contradictions.
Sure.
Who is king if he dies in 78 instead of 68? Right?
Right.
Is he Jesse Jackson? Right?
Right.
Who's Jesse Jackson if God forbid he had been assassinated in 1985, 1 year after his first presidential campaign, or 89 after his second one, right? We may be celebrating Jesse Jackson Day, right? I mean, there's a way that the longer you live, the more room and time there is for the contradictions to emerge, for the mistakes to be made. Malcolm dies at 39. King dies at 39. There's no space or room for that, at least not in the same way.
Right.
So I think you're absolutely right. What would Malcolm or King, for example, be saying about LGBT issues right now?
Right. Well, I was thinking, what is the Attica prison uprising if Malcolm X is on the list of people who goes in and negotiates for them?
Right. That's a great
That was
example.
like the thing that was like in that sort of same time period that
Yeah.
he obviously would have been on the list.
Right, and they asked for Farrakhan, right? So he certainly would have been there, right? Malcolm would have been there.
Right. Or like what's Malcolm X or Martin Luther King for Rodney King? Where are they in the 90s? Like what are these moments that are like huge moments for Black America?
Right.
With these people as our leaders alive, as opposed to the idea of them, right? Because then now anyone can say, well, Malcolm X would have felt this way at Black Lives Matter. Or, we constantly hear white people telling Black people, this isn't peaceful. Martin Luther King would be embarrassed for you.
Right.
So I feel like we were robbed, just robbed of these people. But in the same way, also, I'm sure that they maybe wouldn't be I'm sure people would be like, shut the fuck up.
Right.
Like,
and they may have said and they may have said some stuff worthy of that, right? So, which is why I mentioned the LGBT stuff, because who knows,
right,
how they respond to that, right? I mean, there's a way that you don't know. I mean, King, before he dies, in 68 is having very different positions on Palestine than he had a few years prior. And the more we read, the more we realize he had a much more progressive position on that than people think he did. So again, what would he get canceled, right? Would he get silenced? Would Malcolm get canceled or silenced on a particular issue around war or around whatever, right? Is there a moment where his expression of Islamic faith contradicts with his understanding of queer identity, right? Is there a moment where he gets caught? You know what I mean? We don't know, but I think that's in some ways, what martyrdom allows for. You get robbed of life, which is huge, but you also get delivered in some ways from the critique and the scrutiny of living a long time. The fact that you can be a Nelson Mandela and live as long as he did and still remain loved and admired is a testimony, is a testament to something. As John Lewis, same thing. But I'll tell you something. The Malcolm story, and just to take it back to the book for a second, is interesting to me because so Malcolm again is telling a narrative that sometimes gets flattened when we look at his actual sort of experiences. Malcolm goes to Mecca in 1959. Malcolm travels to the Middle East in 1959. He travels to Africa in 1959. And then in the book, the book focuses on that last trip to Mecca at the end of 64, where he makes Hajj and before being killed in February of the following year. Why is that important? Well, Malcolm saw white Muslims before.
Sure.
Malcolm was in Gaza in 59. Malcolm was in Egypt in 59 and during that kind of height of Gamal Abdel Nasser's rule of Egypt. Malcolm was received as an elder as an elder statesman the second time when he's making these trips in 64. Right. But my point is, there's a way that I think, and this is what happens when we read Baldwin's Go Tell It On. Baldwin's The Fire Next Time as like the only Baldwin text, right? Because of how it ends. There's a way that we can frame almost these Disney type narratives of these people. So what's happened with Malcolm is that now it becomes Malcolm was, and this happens in Islam all the time, right? Is that, the way Muslims, the way mainstream Sunni Orthodox Muslims, or quote unquote Orthodox Muslims talk about Malcolm is, Malcolm was Muslim. Malcolm was bad Muslim. Malcolm goes to Mecca, sees white people, becomes right Muslim, becomes good Muslim. And that becomes the narrative. And again, white people become the kind of predicate for becoming the proper type of Muslim. And there's a way that Malcolm sells that story in the autobiography. This isn't a critique of you or anybody else's reading of Malcolm. It's what Malcolm wanted us to think at that moment for a very particular purpose, right? Malcolm was pushing back against the Nation of Islam's theology and its theodicy and all the other stuff that comes along with being a member of the Nation of Islam at a time where he was no longer going to be a member of the Nation of Islam for whatever reason. That's another story for another time. But it's very interesting to see that in light of what we actually know about Malcolm. And so for me, I love the autobiography, and I love the fact that Malcolm was willing to grow and change. But I often feel like we empty out some of the nuance of it. For example, in that last chapter, which by the way is a compilation from Malcolm's letters. One of the things that made Malcolm was on the road so much that Alex Haley couldn't even sit down for some of the interviews.
Right.
Alex was literally reading the newspapers and saying, "Oh, Malcolm was here this day," and then writing and helping to write based on what the newspaper said Malcolm did, right, or what the newspaper quoted Malcolm as saying. And so when you read all these letters from Mecca that Malcolm is sending back home, this all becomes part of the story. But Malcolm had a very complicated understanding of race. I think you're right. And when Malcolm goes to Mecca, he's saying, wait a minute, these white people are different. So maybe this Nation of Islam theology that says that who is the question number 2 in Nation of Islam theology is who is the devil, right? Or who is the colored man? The colored man is the Caucasian, the white man, the devil, the skunk of the planet Earth. He's saying, well, wait a minute. Okay, white people aren't the devil by birth. This isn't a spiritual claim anymore. I no longer believe in the theology of, Yaqub grafting white devils on the island of Pilan or Patmos. No. But I do believe that there's something about American whiteness that makes y'all act crazy, right? And that maybe outside the context of America, where whiteness, these same bodies might be somewhere else, but its whiteness is a construct, right? And that we can get beyond, and that's the nuance and complexity Malcolm was getting at. But they empty that, and they make it seem like Malcolm saw white people, and suddenly the skies opened up, and that now Malcolm, and I feel like I think we do Malcolm a disservice if we don't appreciate how beautiful a text that is, and how important a text that is to Malcolm. But then we got to, and this is the last thing I'll say about this. But then we got to wrestle with Malcolm's contradictions, because when Malcolm is in that prison cell, and this is where the movie does something different too. When Malcolm is in that prison cell, right around 1950, Malcolm goes to prison in 46. There's he's there from 46 to 52. So somewhere it's not entirely clear from his biographers when he converts, because but he's at least getting the knowledge around 48, 49. And there's a moment where he's in prostration, and or he's what they call sajda, right? He's in a position where he's on his knees, and he's and he looks up, and he sees Master Farad Muhammad. He sees the man that the Nation of Islam says is God in the person. Now in the movie, it's Elijah Muhammad in the cell, and he starts talking to him. But in the book, it's Master Farad Muhammad. This is the most fundamental claim of the Nation of Islam that differentiates it from mainstream Islam, right? Is that God does not is that God came in the person, in a physical body, right? Which is against traditional Islamic thought. And this body, Master Farad Muhammad, who's in the Nation of Islam papers, all the other stuff, is basically, it looks like a white man.
Right.
And the Nation of Islam says he's biracial by its own theology. So Malcolm at one point believes this, and he tells us that he saw him in his prison cell before ever seeing him in real life.
Right.
It would be like if I've never met you before, Tracy, and then I say I had a vision in the Uber ride over here and saw her, and when I got on the Google chat, it was the same face. Right? Once I say that, I'm out there. So for him, by the end of the book, to not believe that this man is God, well, then how did you see him in your cell before ever seeing a picture of him? So I'm not trying to say this to show Malcolm up, because again, I still think it's rather to say that Malcolm believed what he believed. I don't think Malcolm was lying. Right. I think Malcolm wanted to believe that until he didn't.
Right.
But now you got to wrestle with that contradiction. But we never could, because he died.
Right. But I actually think that story is. I think that what you're saying, right, that he created this story, and either it happened to him and therefore he saw God and God really was, or he was bullshitting us to tell a better story. Right. I think that both of those things are sort of in line with what and who Malcolm X was. I think both versions totally work. And I think like one of the things, you asked me what struck me about the book, one of the things that I took notes on this time through was that the book reads like a movie. I mean, it is written like young boy has it all, father's murdered, mother goes crazy, separated from family, nice white people help him, ends up going, like, it's like the whole story is like I don't know, coming of age tale in every single way. And I think, of course, that's by design. You have one of the great orators, right, of Malcolm X, and then you have one of our great storytellers. I mean, Alex Haley wrote Roots. Like, that's a fucking story, you know? Like, so I think that this book, what it does is it tells a really great story. It is a beautiful piece of literature in that sense, and of storytelling, of oral tradition, whatever you want to call it. I've read Manning Marable's book. That is an incredible book of history and research. Yeah. And that is a text that is about, you know, you talked last time about great biographies. That's a great biography, right? And like that these two things, the subject is the same, but they're different, you know, in the same sort of way that like, what was that play? Go Tell It on the Mountain. Is that what it's called? Like that it was about Martin Luther King and
you're talking about Mountaintop. You're talking about
Mountaintop. Mountaintop. Sorry, I'm talking about Mountaintop. Yes, that play is this great storytelling version of sort of the truth, right? And that while it's an autobiography, you know, Malcolm X has a point of view about himself, you know, and like it would be naive of any reader to think that anything that he said or wrote is actually the unbiased truth, if there is such a thing, which, you know, we could talk about that for hours, which it isn't. But this book, it has a point of view and he's trying to do something with it to his audience. He's trying to affect some sort of reaction from his audience in the telling of his story, which I think is why the book is so powerful and incredible, is that I have to believe that he was thinking about his audience. You know?
I think he absolutely was thinking. I think he's thinking a couple of things. One, remember, he had to get permission from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to do this book at first.
Right.
So at first, I think he's thinking about his fidelity to the organization, right? Sure. And in the first 10, 15 meetings, Alex Haley's like frustrated because he's like, all you keep talking about is Elijah Muhammad and the nation. This book is about you, not the nation, which pisses Malcolm off. So then Malcolm is like, not really giving Alex Haley what Alex Haley needs. Alex Haley is annoying Malcolm, and then he says, "Tell me about your mother."
Right. And
it's only at the moment where he tells him about his mother that Malcolm becomes a person and not a kind of robot for the nation, in Alex Haley's estimation. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you're right. Malcolm is a classic American storyteller. Malcolm will tell you some shit that's so compelling, even if it ain't true. The house Negro and the field Negro, right, he tells that story with such sincerity and passion and conviction that we start to believe that's actually how things went, right?
Right. I mean, still to this day, people believe that because of his narrative around that.
And it just became true, even though it's not, right? So there's a way that Malcolm knew his audience and knew what his audience needed to hear, how they needed to hear it. And Malcolm knew that telling certain... Now, there are details in the autobiography that I think Malcolm either got wrong by accident, right? For example, Malcolm tells a story of how the insurance company refused to pay his mother after his father got killed on the run over by a train, etc. He, as Manning Marable shows, like she did get paid. She got paid regularly for years after he died. I don't know if Malcolm's doing that for effect. I don't know if Malcolm got the story mixed up. Right. I don't know if Malcolm's mama lied to him. I mean, who knows, right?
Right. And he was young too.
And he was young. That's what I'm saying. So I don't know. I'm not assuming that Malcolm. I'm assuming I'm giving Malcolm the best read.
Right.
And just saying, you know, there's a gap between what he said and what happened. I don't know how or why. But then there's stuff where it's like, okay, Malcolm, you know you ain't do that much hustling, right? In heart, like that wasn't really. But you go to any jail in America, everybody was Big Meech and Larry Hoover. Nobody says, yeah, I sold dime bags on the corner. You know what I mean? Everybody acted like they was the biggest dope dealer in the world, right? So that's not uncommon. But for Malcolm, again, it was like, well, if I'm the biggest drug dealer in the world, or the biggest hustler in the world, the biggest numbers runner in the world, the biggest pimp in the world, then when I get saved from this depravity from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, it makes the story that much better. And he knows his audience.
I don't know if this is true for you, but this is the kind of storytelling, at least for me, that is the stuff that also really reminded me of my dad. Like him and his friends would get together, and it's like it's like, the one-upmanship. It's
Yep.
like telling these stories. It's the Black oral tradition. Like, that is a super powerful tool. And I think that that's part of why I'm saying, like, I think that he was super aware of his audience, because he knows if he's like, yes, I sold a few pieces of drug paraphernalia on the streets, and it wasn't even really Harlem. I was actually on 80th. Like, I feel like people would be like, okay, this book is whack. And
Right.
he knew that. And I think that, like, and it's important to his legacy and to who he was, is that he also was beloved by poor Black folks.
Yes.
Like, he was beloved by Black folks outside of the South. Like, I think that that is important too, because we think so much of the civil rights movement as being like bus boycott, like Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King. It's so Southern. It's like the voting. It's like all this stuff. But he was beloved by the people who didn't get to go to Morehouse, right? Like, by the folks who were coming out of jail and all this stuff. And I think that that's why the story is told in that way, where it's a lot of hyperbole, because that's how Black folks talk. I mean, that is the oral tradition. That is how so many of our stories have been passed on. Let's take a quick break. Let's take a quick pause. Valentine's Day is upon us, and I've got love on the brain. Love for books, duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind-the-scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. Okay, I want to transition slightly to kind of bring in some of the work that you do. So your book, we didn't really talk about this at all, but your book, Nobody, came out in 2006. 15?
16, yep.
16. And it's oh my God, it's so good, you guys. I can't even believe we didn't talk about it last time, because it's so good and I had like 1,000 questions about it. But fuck it. Go read it. It's about Ferguson and Flint, and the way that it's basically about the ways that the state has caused violence against Black folks, essentially, and disenfranchised folks. But the way what I want to bring into this conversation is, in the civil rights era, there were a lot of leaders, a lot of people who were the people that we know and associate with that time. And when we look at what's going on now in America and the Black Lives Matter movement and other activists and activist groups, it's more or less sort of leaderless. And I think some of it's, of course, by design. But I'm curious what you think, as someone who studied this stuff. Obviously, you know a ton about Malcolm X and a ton about what's going on now. What you think we gain or lose from these leaderless movements, or these movements that are not associated with people. And I'll just tack on that a lot of what's going on now has been, and in the past, but especially now, has been led by Black women and femme and non-gender conforming folks. And so I'm curious if any, like, I don't know, it's a lot of words that I'm saying, but I'm getting at a question, but I'm sort of just want you to talk about it.
Yeah, no, and I think you're moving toward the kind of analysis that I would have offered, which is that it's not a leaderless movement as much as it is a leaderful movement, right? That there's no singular leader, but that's kind of the beauty of this moment. And there's never been a single leader, right? It's just that,
right. Of course.
There have been people who have been positioned as the leaders, these kind of messianic type figures, and they've almost always been cisgendered heterosexual men, and almost always Christian. And so I think that the moment we're in now is so much more powerful at the level of leadership, because I think we have an opportunity to not have a singular figure. We have which means that there's not a single person that they can kill. It means that there's not a single person who could be infiltrated or co-opted. But it also means that we can imagine a more democratic, small d, kind of process for arriving at solutions, for figuring out the direction of the movement. It's not a single person moving us in a direction.
Right.
The fact that those leaders that we're seeing are younger is great. The fact that they're queer is great. The fact that they're women is great. The fact that they're trans is great. The fact that they're gender nonconforming is great. The fact that they're undocumented is great. Like, all these things matter to me, and they should matter to us, because I think we need those voices, not just in the crowd filling up space, but at the front leading at various moments, but not in a way that's vertical, and hierarchical, but horizontal. So we have multiple leaders across the board. I think that is the ideal kind of framework that we see. And so, when we have Malcolm and Martin, it's not that we don't have a Baird Rustin. It's not that we don't have a Fannie Lou Hamer. It's that, their positionalities are going to be understood differently vis-a-vis their power, their identity, and their desire in some ways, to be in that particular space. Their politics, all of it matters. And I think at this juncture, I'm sort of excited about the fact that we have Black Lives Matter, founded by 3 women of color, and then we have Dream Defenders down in Florida with, Philip Agnew and Ahmed Abu Zaid. I love the fact that we have a bunch of grassroots organizations all around the country. I love the fact that we have, movements everywhere from Chicago to Philadelphia to Texas, where people are pushing back against the status quo with all the tools that they have and all the leadership styles that are necessary, but the kind of diversity to occupy those leadership positions and styles. All of that is just dope to me, man, and I couldn't be happier about the moment that we're in.
Oh, I love that. That excites me, because I feel like I'm excited by this moment and the people and the groups and all the different the space that's being created for other people who haven't historically been allowed to be in the forefront, to now get to stand at the front and take ownership of so much that's going on. But I also feel like I feel nervous about that, because I see the ways that what they're trying to say has been, hindered because there's no quote unquote leaders, right?
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's hard. I mean, that's just hard for me. I don't know. It makes me frustrated. So it's nice to hear that you think that it's a good thing too.
For sure.
Because I think that you're much smarter than me, and you've studied this much more. Sometimes it's like you have a feeling maybe in your gut, but you don't know that it's right or that it's wrong. You touched on this about, mostly in the past it's been Christian leadership, people who are Christian. Do you feel any type of way about the lack of religion in this moment, in these movements in this moment?
I do feel a way. I feel great.
You do?
When Malcolm X dies, when he gives the press conference before he dies, he announces his return home. He announces his willingness to work with leaders of all sorts. But he also starts 2 organizations. Muslim Mosque Incorporated, which is the religious arm of what he's doing, but then the Organization of African American Unity, right, modeled after the Organization of African Unity in West Africa. Malcolm was making a divide between who he was as a religious person and who he was as a as a political figure. Whereas for the nation, they were bound up in one another, right? It was a religious movement. And their indictment of America and critiques of the system were vis-a-vis scripture, and their solution, their proposed solutions to the problems of the world were rooted in religion to some extent, right? I mean, the whole "this is the end of days" kind of narrative that most, quite frankly, Christian organizations do, the nation was doing. Malcolm moved away from that. That's powerful. When Malcolm is giving, his speech, some of his most important speeches, whether it's Ballad of Bullet, of course, Message to the Grassroots, which is what I'm thinking of, he's distancing himself from the religious stuff. He understands that there's a place for religion and faith, and Malcolm is no less Muslim the day he dies than the day he gets out of prison in 1952. But Malcolm understood the need for that distinction, partly because he saw the world in different terms. He had a deeper political analysis, right? His critiques of capitalism the scripture couldn't help him wrap his mind around his critique of, say, capitalism or colonialism or imperialism. But there's also a way that he understood that he was going to be alienating people over religious differences, and he no longer wanted to do that. And so, for me at this moment, I don't want a resistance movement that does not include the church or the mosque or the synagogue.
Sure.
But they can no longer be the center of life because they're not the center of Black life. There was a moment where the Black church was the center of Black life, and so of course it made sense for the church to be the epicenter of all this stuff. But it's not. But there's also a way that, unfortunately, our leaders had to come through that sort of brook of fire of the church in order to be sort of validated as leaders. So it's like you had to talk like a preacher, be ordained like as a preacher, in order for people to be like, all right, he's our leader. And now it's like, well, no, there's other ways to do this. When we were on the streets of Ferguson in 2014, it was the first time where it was like, oh wait, the church isn't at the center of this. There were still Moral Mondays, and we still have people like Reverend Sekou or Reverend Barber who are brilliant, radical theologians, right? But there's also a way that they're not the whole story or the center of the story anymore. And that's what I find value in. I saw some preachers show up and get booed on the streets of Ferguson. Not because they didn't have respect for preachers or the church, but because it was like, you got to come with something other than that. The church is not the center anymore.
Right.
So for me, the move away from that is a powerful one, and it's an extraordinary one, a necessary one.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. As someone who's also not very religious, it feels more inclusive to me. Like if it was centered in the church now, I don't know how I would feel about that. I think it would feel alienating in a way that I would not be wild about. But, I feel like we got to talk about white people.
Sure.
Because I feel like Malcolm X spends a lot of this time talking about white people. And you asked me before what things stuck out to me, and I think that how timeless some of the stuff he has to say about white people
timeless is a good word
in this
for
book. Like, it's like, yo, are you actually writing this book today? Because, I like, he's talking about things that didn't have words. He didn't have words for them, but like, white fragility pops into mind, right? The way he describes what the media has done to the things that he said.
Yeah.
There's this great story that he tells. I think it comes up 3 different times in the book, twice with him and then once with Alex Haley in that epilogue, where he talks about the white girl who shows up to the restaurant in Harlem and is like, "How can I join you?" And he's like, "You can't." And then he feels sort of bad about it later. But that story. And he says, white people want to join Black organizations just because they want to be absolved of their racism through proximity to Blackness.
Yep.
And I hear this all the time. There are people that I know who were in the Peace Corps in the 60s and 70s who want to tell me they're not racist because they were in the Peace Corps and they could tolerate being around Black people for 2 years. But some of that stuff, his analysis on white people and what they do, that shit just felt like so spot on still, which is infuriating to me in a lot of ways.
Right.
Because
it shouldn't be this spot on 55 years later.
Yeah, like it's so much later. How are you guys still doing this? And he has the line that he says, if the truth condemns America, then she stands condemned, right? He says that in the book, and that's sort of, I guess, how I think I'm feeling right now in this moment. We talked about George Floyd last time, in this moment of white people discovering racism, or this exhausting narrative of white people are just learning that black people had it bad in America, that whole thing. That line of, if the truth condemns America, then she stands condemned. I think that I'm probably not alone, that I think a lot of black people are probably feeling that way at this point. It's look, I'm not going to tell it to you in another nice way. If you're offended by this, then shit, you did some offensive shit. I just can't. Yeah. So I don't know. There's no question there either. No. I'm done with questions. I just am talking to you.
No. This is great. When Martin Luther King dies, he dies in April 4th of 68, and that day that he's killed, he in just a few days would be writing, or giving rather, a sermon called "Why America May Be Going to Hell." There's a way that these leaders had fundamental critiques of America and really began to doubt its redeemability. I think Malcolm begins there, and then it has to think about what's possible. King begins with the possibility that America is salvageable, right? That's where he begins, but loses faith. It says, I've begun to suspect that most whites are unconscious racists. He begins to wonder what you can do with an empire, and he turns to Harry Belafonte before he dies and says, Harry, I fear that I may have integrated my people into a burning house. So I'm saying that to say there's a way that I think Malcolm begins with the condemnation of America. I mean, that's at the root, in some ways, of Nation of Islam theology, right? Or the argument, right, is that we are in the last days, right? That this is a Babylon. This is a place that is not redeemable. But in this Revelations moment, something new will come, right? Our faith is not in America, but in our ability to produce something different. And in some ways, that's what King ultimately lands, right? Is that our faith is not in America, but our ability to produce something different. But that radical imagination is what we need. It's that radical imagination, and that's where, unfortunately, both Malcolm and Martin and others, fall short. I think not in terms of their radical imagination, but their failure to fully lean on the radical imaginations of black women, who I think have, in so many ways, offered the most ambitious and robust freedom dreams, not just for America, not just for black folk, but for America, not just for America, but for the world. So when you have the Combahee River Collective, for example, they're not just calling for gender justice. They're not just calling for liberation of women. They're not just calling for an end of sexism or patriarchy or male chauvinism, or whatever the language was at the moment. They're calling for internationalism. They're calling for an end to racism. They're calling for an end to third world exploitation. They're forcing America to. They're forcing us to reimagine something beyond this place. When Angela Davis or Miriam Makaba or Ruth Wilson Gilmore, telling us, to not think of warmer and fuzzier prisons, but to dream of a world without prisons. That's a more ambitious freedom dream.
Right.
And it's an inclusive one. Black women never dreamed about freedom just for themselves.
Right.
And as Combahee said, in a lot of ways, the only way, once black women are free, then everybody will be free.
Right.
But until then, no one is. And so I say that to say that when Malcolm was speaking to the condemnation of America, saying if the truth is America is condemnable at the core, but there was another truth that Malcolm was wrestling with at the same time, which was that the people had the capacity to reshape and reimagine and reproduce something much grander, much more fair and just. And what that looked like, how we got there, I think is what Malcolm is working through in his last days on this planet, right? Because now he has a new conception of what the global human family looks like. He now has a broader theoretical toolkit, right? So he has a very specific kind of language to think about neocolonialism. He has a specific language to think about imperialism. He has a specific language to think about white supremacy. He has a specific language to have a critique of capitalism and to call for something else. And he has models, right? That's why he's in Egypt. That's why he's in Ghana. That's why he's looking to Cuba. It's because he understands that in order to change his world, he also needs some functional models and allies and solidarity. And I think Malcolm is getting there. And I think for me, that's what makes Malcolm from one of the towering figures of the 20th century. Because he didn't just stand and condemn America. He wasn't just sort of yelling in the wilderness, although that's enough. That would have been enough. Mm-hmm. That would have been a life worth living. Mm-hmm. It's that he was committed to rebuilding something different in his place.
Right. I mean, I also feel like, yes to all of that. And I feel like he gave Black people who maybe felt forgotten or left behind or whatever, and the Black people of his time, but also Black people now, like me as a 22-year-old or whatever, he gave us autonomy and power over our lives. I feel like, I at least for me, I know for sure, I felt for the first time that I didn't need to love white people, right? Or like that I didn't need them. And I mean that in the greater, broader picture of white people. Obviously, my mother is white and I love her dearly. I have a whole white family. So I'm not talking about specific white humans, but that he gave us like power. He explained the hypocrisy of what we knew, to use a phrase that everyone uses now. He kind of shed light on the gaslighting, right? Like he called out the hypocrisy in a way that felt so real and true, and like he wasn't bullshitting us
at all.
At all. He was like, look, I'm just going to tell you how I see it. And this takes us back to where we started, the sincerity of it all. He really believed it, and he believed that we needed to know it and that we needed to be told it and we needed to understand it and we needed to embrace it and we needed to like carry it forward. And I mean, at a time where people weren't doing that necessarily in that same way or on that same scale, I guess is probably more accurate.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And so, the overall, I'm going back to that question you asked me. What was my takeaway? The overall takeaway of this book from the first time I read it and now this second reading and having seen the movie multiple times, the overall takeaway is that he empowered Black people in a way that is still empowering 55 years later.
Tomorrow it'll be 55 years. The book was published October 29th, 1965, 8 months and 8 days after Malcolm was killed.
It's just incredible. I mean, we didn't talk at all about his assassination, and I don't particularly want to. But for people who are interested in that, there's all sorts of stuff you could read about theories, and there's a documentary on Netflix, I think, and there's all sorts of stuff. But to me, many of my listeners know that's the least interesting part of the story to me. I like true crime books when I know what happened. I know who did it. Like I'm the least interested in the who done it. I'm the most interested in everything before.
Right.
Before we get out of here, I have two questions. One, is there anything else that you want to touch on or talk about this book that you feel is important that we say?
Well, I think Malcolm as reader, right? This book is this is a conversion story in so many ways. Again, classic kind of Augustinian conversion narrative, confessional conversion, all of it. But Malcolm's conversion comes from two things: love and reading.
Mm.
Malcolm is loved by his sister, Ella. He's loved by his mother. He's loved, by brother Bembry. He calls him Bimby in the book, but in real life his name was actually Bembry. These people came to him and helped to convert him, right? His sister obviously loved him even long before he was a member of the Nation of Islam, but they also became members and converted, right? And I think what gets lost in the movie on Malcolm is the role that women played in his life. His sisters, his mother, who was a Garveyite internationalist herself, right? She wasn't just there. It's like Winnie Mandela. She wasn't just there, right?
Right.
These are brilliant political activists and strategists and theorists at play here. Same thing with Du Bois, right? So there's that. I think this is a story about love. It's also a story about reading.
Right.
Malcolm goes into the prison and reads the entire dictionary, word for word. He started with aardvark and got busy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm also read every book the library could. He read philosophy, history, literature. Malcolm was so widely read, and so much of it was self-taught. Malcolm switched prisons a couple times to get more access to education programs. Malcolm read, and the Nation of Islam itself, it's about reading. Elijah Muhammad was given books to read by Master Farad Muhammad, right? So this is a tradition of deep reading.
Right.
Malcolm's life was changed by books, because even to the extent that the Nation of Islam converted him, they placed their bet on the fact that they could verify everything they were saying through the books that Malcolm was reading. So even the conversion only happens because of the books Malcolm is able to read to aver the claims that they're making. So for me, there's no Malcolm X if there's no books.
Sure.
So the fact that Malcolm now gets to write a book that saves our lives after reading books that saved his, to me, is just a beautiful cycle and outcome to an extraordinary journey.
Ugh, that's so good. Okay. My last thing that I always talk about, which we're actually not going to talk about, I have a different question. I'm really mixing it up with you.
Oh, good.
Normally we talk about the title and the cover, but I sort of feel like there's not a lot to say about those two things necessarily, because there's so many versions of the book. And I think the autobiography of Malcolm X is pretty clear what the book's about. So instead, I'm going to ask you this very personal question, which is, did you and Uncle Bobby ever talk about this book?
We never did.
No.
I wasn't in a place. If we did, I don't remember. But I don't believe we did, because I feel like I'd remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, my Uncle Bobby was, he was battling cancer while I was in high school, and he died soon after. So by the time I was getting to Malcolm X, he was fading. So I didn't get the benefit of reading him while Uncle Bobby was alive and appreciating it. But God, I wish I had.
Mm-hmm.
God, I wish I could have studied and learned at Uncle Bobby's feet even more. But I didn't get a chance. Sorry, I'm just thinking about how much, life is just so fleeting, and you just don't know when you're going to get what you get, so you just got to make the most of it while you can. And I got so much from Uncle Bobby. And so rather than be sad about what I didn't get, I'm going to give thanks for what I did. But no, I didn't get a chance to share that book with him.
Right. I was just curious.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, we're going to end on that. Again, Marc has a lot of books. I'm going to link to them in the show notes for you. I'm going to link to, of course, Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Bookstore. I'm going to link to everything we talked about, where you can find Marc. This was so special, and I am just so grateful for you sharing your knowledge. And I kept thinking during this conversation, his students are so lucky, and they probably don't even know. They probably think, like, who's this guy who's so full of shit, knows everything? But they'll think back and be like, oh my God, Marc Lamont Hill Professor Hill was so great, you know? But thank you so, so much for being here and sharing your insight with us.
Thank you for hanging out with me, man. This is a great podcast. I'm taking notes from my own podcast, so this is dope.
Well, you can have me on your podcast.
Oh,
I'm
coming.
Available to be on.
You are coming.
Okay. Yay. And everybody else, we will see you in the stacks. Thank you to everyone who read along and listened with us today. I'd also like to say thank you to Marc Lamont Hill for being our guest. And it's now time for the moment you've all been waiting for. Our November book club selection is The Butterfly Effect: How Kendrick Lamar Ignited the Soul of Black America by Marcus J. Moore. We will discuss the book on Wednesday, November 25th. Tune in next week to hear who our guest will be for this conversation. And for now, happy reading. Please make sure you're subscribed to this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts, take a moment to leave a rating and a review. For more from The Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram and at The Stacks Pod _ on Twitter. And check out our website, thestackspodcast.com. Today's episode was edited and produced by Sebastian Alcala. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tegirigis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.